May 7, 1945, Czechoslovakia, 7 kilometers southwest of Plzeň, 16:23 hours. 47 riflemen stood in a ragged line across a dirt road. Their weapons were raised, barrels leveled at chest height. Safeties were off. Fingers rested against triggers. The sun was low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the road and the fields on either side. Ahead, approximately 60 meters distant, a column of German soldiers stood motionless. They faced the American line without moving. Their hands were visible, some raised, some at their sides, none holding weapons. Rifles and machine pistols lay in a pile at the roadside, 20 meters behind the column. The pile was large enough to be visible as a distinct mound of metal and wood. No one spoke. The only sound was wind moving through grass in the adjacent fields. The American riflemen did not lower their weapons. The German soldiers did not move forward or backward. Both groups remained stationary, separated by 60 meters of empty road. The American sergeant stood 3 paces behind the firing line. His carbine hung from its sling across his chest. His right hand rested on the weapon stock. His left hand was at his side, open, not clenched. Time passed without measurement. The line held. No shots were fired. The American platoon had been advancing eastward since dawn, part of a larger company movement through the Czech countryside following the collapse of organized German resistance in the region. The war in Europe was effectively over. Surrender negotiations were ongoing, and most German units had ceased fighting or were withdrawing in disorder. The platoon's orders were to continue advancing, secure designated road junctions, and disarm any German personnel encountered. The platoon consisted of 40, 1 rifleman, 1 lieutenant, 3 sergeants, and 2 medics, 47 men total. They had been in continuous combat operations since landing in France in July 1944. Casualties and replacements had cycled through the unit multiple times. The current composition included 17 men who had been with the platoon since France, 14 who had joined during the winter, and 16 replacements who had arrived in April. The German column had been spotted at 16:10 hours, moving westward along the same road the Americans were using. Initial observation from a distance of 800 meters showed approximately 70 to 80 men in loose formation, some riding in horse-drawn wagons, others on foot. No vehicles were visible. The column appeared to be withdrawing rather than maneuvering for combat. The platoon lieutenant had ordered deployment across the road in a blocking position. The platoon moved forward quickly, reaching the current position at 16:18 hours. The German column, seeing the American force, had halted immediately. Within 2 minutes, the weapons had been stacked at the roadside, and the German personnel had formed into an informal group facing the American line. The distance between the two groups was 60 meters, close enough for clear observation of faces and individual movements, far enough to provide reaction time if any hostile action occurred. The terrain was open farmland with scattered trees. No cover existed between the two positions. Weather was clear, visibility unlimited. Standard procedure for encountering, surrendering, or withdrawing enemy forces in May 1945 was straightforward. Accept surrender, disarm personnel, conduct brief searches for weapons or intelligence materials, and either hold prisoners for military police collection or direct them to designated assembly areas. The process was routine and had been executed dozens of times in the preceding weeks as German resistance disintegrated. However, doctrine also emphasized caution. Surrendering forces could contain holdouts willing to fight, soldiers concealing weapons, or personnel attempting to delay American units while other German forces escaped. Training stressed that vigilance must be maintained until all enemy personnel were secured and searched. The riflemen in the platoon had experienced various outcomes when encountering German forces during the final weeks of combat. Most surrenders had been peaceful and uncomplicated. A few had involved brief exchanges of fire before resistance ceased. One incident in April had involved a German officer attempting to negotiate terms rather than surrender unconditionally, resulting in a tense standoff that was resolved only after higher command intervention. The current situation appeared routine. Disarmed soldiers, no visible weapons, hands visible, no aggressive movement. But the number of German personnel was substantial. 70 to 80 men outnumbered the platoon, nearly 2 to 1. If any significant portion of the German force retained concealed weapons or chose to resist, the outcome would be violent and uncertain. The platoon's automatic weapons, 2 Browning automatic rifles and 1 .30 caliber machine gun, were positioned at intervals along the line, providing overlapping fields of fire across the road. The machine gun crew had deployed their weapon on its bipod, ammunition belt loaded and ready. The BR gunners stood with their weapons at shoulder height, fingers near triggers. The lieutenant had moved forward to the front of the line at 16:20 hours. He carried a Springfield rifle and a holstered pistol. He studied the German formation through binoculars for approximately 30 seconds, then lowered the binoculars and stepped back behind the line. He had not given orders to advance or fire. At 16:23 hours, one of the German soldiers took a step forward. The movement was slight. 1 foot advanced 6 inches. The soldier stopped. The American rifleman tensed. Several shifted aim fractionally, tracking the movement. The German soldier raised both hands higher. He did not speak. He took no further step. The sergeant behind the American line lifted his hand from his carbine. He opened his mouth as if to give an order. He did not speak. His hand remained raised, palm forward, visible to the men in the line. The riflemen held their aim. No one fired. No one lowered their weapon. The sergeant's hand stayed raised. 5 seconds. 10. The German soldier who had stepped forward remained motionless with his hands raised. The rest of the German column stood without moving. 15 seconds. The lieutenant, standing 10 meters to the sergeant's left, turned his head toward the sergeant. He did not speak. He made no gesture. The sergeant's hand remained raised. 20 seconds. No order was given. No shot was fired. The line held at 16:24 hours. The tension remained unchanged. The American riflemen continued to aim at the German formation. The German soldiers remained standing with hands visible. The sergeant's hand stayed raised in the halt position. No one spoke. Some of the riflemen began to glance sideways toward each other, without moving their heads significantly. Eyes shifted left and right along the line. No verbal communication occurred. The silence was complete except for wind and the distant sound of engine noise from somewhere to the west. possibly vehicles from another American unit, possibly civilian traffic. At 16:25 hours, 30 seconds had passed since the German soldier had stepped forward. The soldier slowly lowered his hands to waist height. He did not move his feet. The American rifleman tracked the movement but did not fire. The sergeant's hand remained raised. One of the Bayard gunners shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The movement was slight but visible along the line. Several other riflemen adjusted their stances similarly. Small movements to relieve muscle tension without breaking position. The machine gun crew remained absolutely still, the gunner's eye at the sight, his hands on the weapon's grips. At 16:26 hours, the lieutenant walked slowly forward until he stood beside the sergeant. He spoke quietly, too quietly for the words to be heard by anyone except the sergeant. The conversation lasted approximately 5 seconds. The lieutenant then stepped back to his previous position. The sergeant lowered his raised hand to his side. The sergeant did not give an order. The riflemen remained in firing positions. The German column remained standing in place. 2 minutes had now passed since the German soldier had stepped forward. The sun descended fractionally lower. Shadows lengthened across the road. The temperature was beginning to drop as evening approached. Some of the German soldiers appeared to be shivering from cold or tension could not be determined by observation. At 16:27 hours, the sergeant took 3 steps forward, positioning himself at the front of the American line. He did not speak to the platoon. He faced the German formation and stood without moving. The wait continued. At 16:28 hours, the sergeant called out in a voice loud enough to carry across the 60-meter gaps, "Kommen Sie higher, langsam." The words were simple German, "Come here slowly." His pronunciation was imperfect but comprehensible. The reason for the 5-minute delay between initial contact and the order to approach was later recorded briefly in the platoon after. Action report filed on May 80. Enemy personnel encountered 16:10 hours. Vicinity grid reference 487-392. Approximately 70. 5 disarmed soldiers confirmed as non-hostile. Processing delayed pending assessment of intentions and confirmation of complete disarmament. No resistance encountered. The explanation was procedural. The sergeant had held the line because he was uncertain whether the German formation contained concealed weapons or individuals prepared to resist. The presence of the stacked weapons was visible, but verification that all weapons had been surrendered required close inspection. The size of the German force, nearly double the American platoon, meant that any armed resistance would result in casualties on both sides. The sergeant's decision to delay was based on observable indicators. The German soldiers had not advanced after the initial halt. They had not made aggressive movements. They had maintained visible hand positions. These behaviors suggested genuine surrender, but did not confirm it absolutely. The 5-minute wait served a specific purpose. It allowed observation of the German formation's discipline and reactions. If concealed weapons existed, the waiting period created psychological pressure that might reveal them. Soldiers fingering hidden pistols, individuals whispering to each other, groups shifting positions to prepare for action. None of these indicators appeared during the wait. The sergeant's assessment was tactical rather than cautious. He was not avoiding engagement out of reluctance to fire. He was determining whether engagement would be necessary. The wait was a tool for gathering information without exposing his platoon to unnecessary risk. The lieutenant's brief conversation with the sergeant at 16:26 hours had confirmed the assessment. The lieutenant had observed the same indicators. He had authorized the sergeant to proceed with processing the surrender. The order to approach was given only after both the sergeant and lieutenant were satisfied that the German formation posed no immediate threat. No formal analysis was conducted. No written evaluation was prepared. The decision was made based on 5 minutes of silent observation and professional judgment accumulated through 10 months of combat experience. At 16:29 hours, 6 German soldiers began walking slowly toward the American line. They kept their hands visible and moved at a steady pace. The American riflemen maintained aim until the 6 men were within 10 meters, then lowered their weapons slightly but did not sling them. The sergeant stepped forward and addressed the apparent senior German NCO, identifiable by rank insignia still visible on his uniform. A brief exchange occurred in broken German and English. The German NCO confirmed that all weapons had been surrendered and that the column consisted of supply troops and administrative personnel withdrawing from positions farther east. At its the sergeant ordered half the American platoon to advance and conduct searches of the German personnel. The other half remained in position with weapons ready. The searches were conducted methodically. Pockets emptied, uniform items checked, boots inspected. No concealed weapons were found. Several men carried personal items, photographs, and documents. These were examined briefly and returned except for military maps and 1 set of identification papers that were retained for intelligence purposes. 5 hours, all German personnel had been searched and organized into a column for movement to a prisoner collection 0.6 kilometers to the west. The horse-drawn wagons were inspected and found to contain personal baggage, supplies, and equipment, but no weapons or ammunition. The wagons were added to the column. At 1700 hours, the German column began moving westward under guard of 1 American squad. The remainder of the platoon resumed its advance eastward. The stacked weapons were left at the roadside to be collected later by follow-on forces. No shots had been fired. No physical contact beyond the searches had occurred. The processing had taken 37 minutes from initial contact to separation. The platoon continued its advance without incident. By 1745 hours, they had reached their assigned objective, a crossroads 3 kilometers farther east. They established defensive positions and waited for further orders. The after-action report filed by the platoon on May 8, 1945, contained 3 sentences about the encounter. Enemy personnel encountered 16:10 hours vicinity grid reference 487392. Approximately 75 disarmed soldiers confirmed as non-hostile. 73 prisoners transferred to MP custody 1730 hours. No additional documentation was prepared. The sergeant did not file a separate report explaining the 5-minute delay or the decision to hold fire. The lieutenant's daily log entry for May 7 listed the encounter as a routine prisoner processing operation. No commendation was recommended for any personnel involved. The captured German soldiers were processed through prisoner collection points and eventually repatriated. Their records, if they existed, have not been located in post-war archives. The names of the German personnel were not recorded in the American platoon's documentation beyond a count of 70. 3 individuals transferred to military police. The incident was not mentioned in company or battalion operational summaries for May 7. Higher headquarters documentation for that date focused on the imminent German surrender and final territorial positions. Individual platoon actions were not detailed unless they involved significant combat or unusual circumstances. A routine prisoner processing operation did not qualify. None of the 47 American personnel present wrote accounts of the incident in letters or post-war memoirs. The encounter lasted 37 minutes in the final days of a war that had continued for 11 months across France, Belgium, and Germany. It was unremarkable among hundreds of similar encounters during the collapse of German forces in April and May 1945. The sergeant who held the line received no recognition for his decision. Standard procedure did not provide for commendations based on restraint or decisions not to engage. Awards were granted for actions taken, not actions withheld. The sergeant completed his service in Europe and returned to the United States in November 1945. He was discharged in January 1946 with the rank of staff sergeant. He returned to civilian employment and worked in construction until retirement in 1978. He was interviewed once in 1984 for a local historical society's oral history project focused on World War II veterans from the county. In that interview, he was asked what he remembered most clearly from the war. He mentioned the cold during the winter of 1944, the difficulty of keeping equipment functional, and the relief when German resistance collapsed in April 1945. He did not mention the incident on May 7. The interviewer did not ask about specific encounters with German forces in the final days of the war. He died in 1991. His personal effects included discharge papers, a few photographs, and campaign ribbons. No diary or written account of his service was found. The lieutenant remained in the Army after the war, serving through the Korean conflict and retiring in 1962 as a major. He was interviewed multiple times for military history projects. In a 1970 interview focused on small unit leadership, he was asked about difficult decisions during combat. He mentioned several incidents involving tactical choices under fire and decisions about allocating limited resources. He did not reference the May 7 encounter. Of the 47 American personnel present, 39 survived the war. Post-war records indicate that 5 were interviewed for various historical projects between 1975 and 2005. None mentioned the incident without specific prompting. When researchers later cross-referenced participant names with the May 7 operation based on unit records, 2 veterans recalled processing German prisoners in early May, but could not provide specific details about dates or locations. The road 7 kilometers southwest of Plzeň is now paved and serves as a minor highway connecting rural communities. The fields on either side remain agricultural. No marker indicates that any event occurred there in May 1945. The platoon's after-action report for May 7, 1945, is filed in a storage facility containing thousands of similar documents. The file is accessible to researchers, but rarely consulted. The entry describing the encounter occupies 3 lines on a typed form. The stacked weapons left at the roadside were collected by Volley on American forces on May 8 and destroyed or distributed as souvenirs. No inventory of those weapons exists. The exact number of rifles, machine pistols, and other arms in the pile was not recorded. What remains is a line of riflemen with fingers on triggers, a sergeant's raised hand holding them in place. 73 German soldiers standing with empty hands. 60 meters of silent road. 5 minutes that passed without gunfire. No volley. No order to fire. No engagement. The line held because one order was never given.